Okay, thank you all for joining us for using the new CAN case note template to support your Diversion conversation training. I am Amber Freeman. I am the Director of Training, Technical Assistance, and Community Impact at the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. So I'm going to just quickly give a quick overview of Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness for those of you that may not know about our organization. So CCEH is a nonprofit organization. We are a member organization that works to end homelessness. It says it right in our name. So right now we are leading the statewide efforts to end homelessness. We have CT CAN end homelessness that I hope many of you have tapped into and are attending those meetings. But our overall mission at CCEH is to, in partnership with the members and the different communities throughout the state, really to create change through leadership, advocacy, and building the capacity of members and in the field to respond to the environmental challenges. But our collective mission is very simple. It's very clear. It is to prevent and end homelessness in Connecticut. Says it right in our name. Our vision is to have a statewide system that is capable of ensuring that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. I know you all hear that all the time, but that is our vision, to have a real system that we don't want anyone to experience homelessness, but if they do, it should be as brief, as short as possible, and it should only be one time so that they're not entering back into our system. So we're going to go over, of course, we're going to talk about the new CAN case note template, but before we really dive into that, we have to go over some just foundational things that led us up to the CAN case note template. So we're going to talk about homelessness in our current state as Connecticut and where we stand. We're going to go into the causes and the effects of homelessness. We're going to do a quick overview of our homeless response system, the importance of a CAN appointment and the CAN assessment. Then we're going to dive into having those diversion conversations. We're going to break out and do some scenarios, and then we're going to go over the CAN case note template and using that as a support for your diversion conversation. So just so that I get a sense of who is here, can you all just put in the chat or feel free to unmute? Let me know, what your role is in your organization. Do we have a good amount of diversion specialists here, or is there supervisors here? Who is joining me? And if you all can, if you're able to, go on video. I would like this training to be as interactive as possible and have participation. That's the only way we can practice having a divergent conversation. So if you are in a space that allows, if you can turn your video on. All right, so I have some diversion specialists, program supervisors. Great. Okay. So yes, this training will primarily be for front entry, as we're going to go into that CAN assessment, a CAN appointment, and really using the CAN case note template. And that CAN case note template is used for the front end when you're having those first CAN appointments. Great. All right. Thank you. So just to see where we are as a system right now. You all know more than anyone else because you're doing those CAN appointments. People are contacting you all initially, but homelessness is rising. We've seen increases, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, and we remain in a crisis. So homelessness has grown significantly, and our data has shown that since the onset of the pandemic. Over these past 2 years since the pandemic, since 2020, there's been a 39% increase in people experiencing homelessness. There's been a 56% increase in calls to 211. The call center for the homeless response system with 114,949 calls. People are seeking housing assistance and shelter. There has been a 30% increase in unsheltered homelessness served by street outreach since 2019. And there has been an 82% increase in CAN appointments made for families, individuals, and youth that are at imminent risk of homelessness since 2019. Those numbers are huge. And you all being on the front end, I'm sure you feel that. You're the people that's receiving these phone calls, you're having the CAN appointments, you are assessing their needs and trying to connect them to resources. So that's why we have put in place a CAN case note template to also assist with that, being that you don't have the timing as you had previously, being that you all are completely overwhelmed by the amount of calls that you're receiving and the amount of assessments that you're doing. We put together a CAN case note template just to support that initial conversation so we can really gather as much information as possible. Okay, so the people that call you all usually fall in two categories, right? Because there's two main categories for homelessness. There's literal homelessness, and then there's imminent risk. Literal is they are people that are sleeping on the streets. They're in places that's not meant for human habitation, maybe abandoned buildings, maybe in their cars, but they are absolutely in the state of homelessness. They're experiencing homelessness. And then we have that imminent risk where they are at risk of losing their housing within a short time period. So they may be facing eviction. Their family may have kicked them out of their apartment. They may have some struggles and think they have no other option. That's the group of people that we really, truly want to have those divergent conversations with, because they haven't entered our system yet, right? They're having a housing crisis, and maybe we can assist with resolving that housing crisis and diverting them. So we're going to focus on that group of people during this training today. For any training that I do, when we're talking about homelessness, I always like to include some context to it, right? People just don't end up in homelessness. There's some root causes of homelessness, and we really have to get a sense of the people that we're working with and what causes them to enter our system. So some main causes of homelessness is just a lack of housing, especially now. There's very limited housing stock. People face eviction, there's instability, and then there's homelessness. So just a lack of housing, not having housing, obviously makes someone homeless. Income and housing affordability. We have seen rent increases. Rent has gone up, employment wages has not gone up. So people simply cannot afford the housing that they used to have previously. People that have a history of health problems, such as mental health, substance abuse, physical health, they also are at a higher risk of experiencing homelessness, just because of maybe their symptoms may be so severe, or having to pay the additional money in order to take care of themselves. They may have to choose between their health and their housing. We also have individuals that are escaping violence. So there's many survivors of domestic violence. They become homeless when they're leaving their abusive relationship. They may not have any other network, any other support of people that they can use for assistance as they're fleeing their domestic violence. So escaping violence, they're at a higher risk of experiencing homelessness. And then lastly, the impact of racial disparities. So minority groups in the US experience homelessness at a higher rate than whites. And when we're talking about homelessness, there's no way that I can ever do a training without really diving into that part, because it is so severe when you're talking about the significant racial disparities in homelessness. So if you look at these graphs right here, you see the top part is the homeless population. And you see the bottom is the US population. So for homeless population, people of color make up about 39% are experiencing homelessness. And then 50% of that 39% are families with children. So almost half of the individuals experiencing homelessness are people of color. However, people of color, well, Black in particular, only make up about 13% of the US population. That's a huge difference. 13% of the US population, but out of the 13%, we make up about 39% of individuals experiencing homelessness. Why do you all think that is? And just FYI, when I have trainings, I like to throw out questions and hope that someone responds back. So it will be many questions out to you all. But why do you all think that why do we have these racial disparities in homelessness?
We'll have there's less resources for some populations.
Yes. Resources, that is definitely one.
For some populations.
Definitely.
Income,
yes. Being able to have the access to employment.
yeah.
Any others?
Housing availability.
Housing availability, and then also with the racial component on that, it's also housing discrimination. So landlords, renting their units to people of color. There is housing discrimination. We have to also take into account just the long-standing historical and structural racism. We're looking at incarceration. People of color are incarcerated at a higher rate. And so when you're exiting incarceration, it is hard to find stable housing. And then also, I don't think any of you all mentioned just the access to quality healthcare. Okay, so all of those different things affect our system, and we're talking about the system. We'd have to talk about the CAN, our Coordinated Access Network. Our system is broken down into 7 different regions. Each region is broken up into, it has their own CAN. And within the CANs, they meet so that we have a coordinated approach, and they work to divert individuals from shelter. They manage the access to the shelter. They conduct homeless outreach, and they match individuals to different housing vacancies when available. But having a coordinated outreach approach has really helped us as a state just operate it in a more coordinated way. People call 211 and want to be connected to the CAN in order to receive services. And there's a lot of services that someone can have access to once they're connected to a CAN. I'm just going to quickly go over this because you all are a part of the CAN system. Sometimes we have individuals from outside areas that really don't know how our system operates, so I have to go into more detail, but I'll just quickly go over it because you all are already, you're a part of the CAN. So different services available through the CAN. Obviously, there's emergency shelter. People come and they can get referred to community partners such as mental health, substance abuse, medical employment service. Case management may range from light touch to intense. It's really based off of a client's needs. And then assistance to housing search that will include landlord engagement, advocacy, education, as well as lease compliance, how to really be a good tenant and what does having a lease truly entail. And then lastly, financial assistance. So being connected to a CAN, you can receive one-time diversion assistance, or someone may need something more in depth, such as RACRE housing, which is short-term rental assistance, or permanent supportive housing, which is for long-term rental assistance for those that truly need it, that may have a severe mental health or substance abuse diagnosis. So our coordinated, our CAN system, we have a what we call a homeless response system. And actually it needs to be updated now that we have several points of entry with the new hubs. But we're really only going to focus on half of this system in this training today. We're really just going to focus on getting up into the point where someone has a CAN assessment. So there's two main points of entry. Someone can call 211 to be connected to our services, or someone can come in through outreach. So that's the unsheltered population. But let's say if someone comes in through 211, they call. At every point throughout our system, you all see the arrows going up for diverted. We want to divert at every single point. So they'll call 211, will try to connect them to resources and divert them and assist them with their housing crisis. If they're not able to, they will connect with you all, right? And they will have a CAN assessment. At that CAN assessment, that is when you all really truly try to divert them as well. And that's what we're going to talk about. Of course, we know that everyone is not able to be diverted. And if they're not, then you all either prioritize them for a shelter, or they're connected to a shelter bed if we have them available. At that point, then they are also, after there is VI for now, since we haven't sunsetted yet, they'll be placed on a by name list and will be discussed in the housing solutions meetings that you all have in your various CANs. But for the sake of this training today, we're really going to focus on that front part, right? The CAN assessment and having that diversion conversation. So the CAN assessment, that CAN appointment, the purpose of it is really to identify an individual or family's need to resolve their housing crisis. So we should try as much as possible to truly divert them, which is really having a problem-solving conversation, and help them to identify any resources that they may need so that they don't enter the system. So at that point, you all are getting as much information as possible about what's going on, what the housing crisis is, how is their experience, what is their current situation like, and documenting as much as possible. So what we've seen is you all do the CAN assessment, and then you have the case note, right, that you also do following that. And the case note was previously just a blank document, regular case note. So we created the CAN case note template to support your diversion, your initial conversation, so that you can cover some of that initial information that you're getting. So we're going to go into that. But of course, before we go into that, we have to talk about what is shelter diversion. What does it truly look like? And being that this is such a small group, feel free to interrupt me at any point, ask any questions. So the basics of shelter diversion. Shelter diversion is a strategy that prevents homelessness at the front door of shelter. The main goals for shelter diversion is to help people identify immediate alternative housing arrangements. Also, to connect them with services and or financial assistance to help them secure and maintain permanent housing, or develop a long-term housing plan, right? So we want to connect them and assist them with their housing crisis, but we don't want them to experience that housing crisis again. So what type of long-term plan can be put into place so that it's not a continuous cycle. So every effort should be made to divert clients to other housing solutions at their first contact with the homeless response system, which is many of you all when you're doing those CAN appointments. So try to divert as much as possible. So what diversion is, basically, it is an intensive service intervention. And through an interactive problem-solving conversation, you are, I have some other stuff that popped up on my screen. You are working with the client to really understand what caused their housing crisis. What happened? How are they getting here? What is their story? That's also trauma-informed care. But you want to explore what immediate solutions to the crisis may be possible and help them pursue a solution. So the idea is to immediately get the client into a safe housing alternative, which may be short or long-term. So when as a person is in a housing crisis, they often cannot see outside of their housing crisis, which is why someone that's trained in diversion, such as you all, can help them identify their appropriate resources. Sometimes they are so stuck on what's right in front of them. They have this crisis. They're not able to problem solve on their own. They're not able to say, oh, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can contact this family member. Maybe if I just get this resource, then that can be the change that I need to help me with this housing crisis. So that is really what's important about diversion, is really being able to assist them and help them through this process. So there's many reasons why we want to implement diversion. Of course, to help someone through their housing crisis, but it also improves our system outcomes, by reducing the entries into homelessness. So the more people that we can divert from our system and help with their housing crisis, the less people that are coming in. It also improves the quality of life by helping people avoid the stress of shelter stays. People may think that they have no other option and they want to go to a shelter, or they need to be added to a shelter wait list. No one wants to do that, but they may not see that there are other options. Also, we need to do diversion because it conserves and targets resources. So the shelter beds, being that we don't have many, any shelter beds, they really just need to be used for those that truly, truly, truly need it. If we're able to divert someone, then divert, so that it's more beds available for those that truly have no other options. Diversion also cuts down on the shelter wait list, right? There's no other people that need to be added because we were able to resolve their housing crisis. And then lastly, homelessness is a traumatic event. People that contact you all or just going through a housing crisis, it's traumatic. And trauma is defined as psychological, emotional response to an event or experience that is deeply distressing. Knowing that you may not have anywhere to live is stressful. Having the idea that you have a family, right? You have a child and you are not able to supply a basic need, which is housing. That is stressful. It is a traumatic event that we don't want anyone to experience. So traumatic events that happen over an extended period of time can lead to complex trauma, which can manifest in deterioration of both physical and mental health. It affects you greatly. People with trauma can often feel shame. They can feel helplessness, powerless, and intense fear. So I know sometimes when you're receiving those phone calls or you're trying to work with someone and you're not able to get the information or you're not able to have a conversation just know that it may be because they are impacted by the trauma that is what they're currently experiencing, and it's a stressful situation. Okay. Lastly, shelter diversion, it's cost effective to do diversion. These numbers probably need to be updated with where we currently are with just how everything has increased. But with that being said, diversion is still more cost effective. So diversion assistance can be helping someone get a phone or to help to mediate a situation for them, right? Some family conflict so that they can stay with their family. It may be helping them get a bus ticket. Maybe there's some family out of state. Maybe they have another job opportunity out of state, but they just don't know how to get there. So getting them that Greyhound bus ticket or train ticket or plane ticket, whatever it may be, so that they can go somewhere else and have a better housing opportunity. It may be assistance with the utility bill or back fees. Sometimes people have an apartment available, but they're not able to move in because they can't get electricity on, which is a requirement. Or they have to have their electricity on in their unit, or they're in violation and they don't have it. So Diversion can assist with that, as well as the first month rent deposit, so that they can move in. And then after they move in, maybe they'll be able to maintain the rent on their own. So Diversion looks different in different areas, but then it's also less expensive, right? It's less expensive than wrapper housing. Wrapper housing, someone being in the program can be maybe a starting point, $5,000. Being in a shelter stay, a shelter bed is roughly $8,600, but I am sure that has increased. It is less expensive than street outreach, working with someone, which can be around $3,000 more in hospitalization versus housing a person. So there's so many different ways that we can apply diversion, and there's so many different reasons why diversion is important. So just covering that background information as far as why we promote diversion and why we always want to divert. I have been talking for a bit. Do you all have anything to add to that before we go to our next section? Okay. So we talked about what diversion is, and now we're going to talk about how to do effective diversion, right? How to really go about having these problem-solving conversations. So there's a few things when you're having these problem-solving conversations, there's a few things that can be very beneficial that goes into having these conversations. Using the practice of motivational interviewing, really knowing how to ask those open-ended questions, knowing how to summarize, knowing how to assist someone with saying what they want to happen. So motivational interviewing is a great skill set to have that can support your diversion conversation. I will say we will be having a motivational interviewing workshop in person June 13th and 14th. I am still confirming the location, but we will be having an in-person motivational interviewing workshop all day for both of those days, because it's really an in-depth practice. Also, another skill that can assist with your diversion conversation is just knowing about trauma-informed care. As I went over about how homelessness is traumatic, how going through a housing crisis is traumatic, knowing that someone's trauma affects them and how you can respond to that. And knowing that that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want services or they don't want assistance, but it impacts them. With trauma-informed care, with you all being on the front lines, also knowing that how that trauma may affect you. and what you all are dealing with on both sides, and how you can protect yourself as being a provider. When you're having these problem-solving conversations, it's also really important to understand the strengths-based approach. As I said, when someone has a housing crisis, they may not be able to see outside of that crisis. So reminding them that there have been things that they have been able to do successfully. They have been able to live independently before. They have been able to sustain income, right? But they have tons of strengths, and highlighting those strengths and how those strengths can be used to assist them through this housing crisis. There's also some system foundations that can be useful when you all are having your divergent conversation. So having a background and knowing about race, as we went over, and how different race affects people and the disparities that's involved in it, how LGBTQ individuals also have a higher rate of experiencing homelessness, and just the trauma and different things that they have to go through as well. And then just disability equity also. It's important to know about youth. Youth have a higher rate of experiencing homelessness, and then domestic violence. So having a strong foundation on various populations. There are 6 main steps when we're talking about having a problem-solving conversation. The first step, and one that I think is extremely important because it sets the foundation for the others, is really setting the foundation. So starting to build rapport with the individual and making the individual feel as comfortable as possible. You know that you're about to ask them a lot of questions. You know that you're going to ask them about their housing crisis. You're going to have a problem-solving conversation. So you want them to feel comfortable so that they can disclose the information with you. It's also not easy to tell a complete stranger that you're struggling, that you're having some really difficult times. So it's not easy. So you want to start off with just introducing yourself and your purpose, that you're going to have this problem-solving conversation, and why you're doing it. Why are you asking them all these questions? It's really to gather as much information as possible so that you can assist them. You want to have a clear agenda and be prepared. So if there's any notes you need to review, if you want to have the template printed out before you go into your appointment, great, but be prepared. Next step is active listening. So really, really listening to what the person is telling you, and also being able to kind of read between the lines. So this is when you're starting to reality test the options, right? As I said, someone may not be able to see beyond the housing crisis, but there may be some other things there. So really listening to see what some options are. You want to start using open-ended questions, rephrasing. You want to have a relaxed, open body position, and allow time for the person to share their story. What's going on with them? What is their housing crisis? How can you assist them? What resources can you provide them? And so forth. But really listening and actively listening, being present. You don't want to just be sitting behind your laptop if you're in person with the person, but being present and showing that you're listening. Step 3 is strengths and support exploration. So you're going to focus on the person's strengths, their capabilities, and autonomy. You're going to validate what they have accomplished in the past to remind them that you can get through this. You do have some skills. There is some options for you. You want to allow the conversation to be as open and fluid as possible, and not go down a full list of question to question to question, but have a conversation, right? And then explore housing and employment history, income possibilities, the potential support network. Step 4 is, again, you're going to reality test. But this is when you're going to start creating some options, right? Some possibilities, some housing solutions based off of what they said. Maybe if they're talking about their sister said that they have to be out of the residence by next week. You may want to go deeper and ask, what happened, right? Is there any chance that you can stay? Can you possibly not have your friends over since that's a concern and that's why she wants to put you out? Are you able to negotiate anything instead of just entering the shelter? Okay. And then you want to start setting some attainable goals. Step 5 is mediation and problem solving. So as I just said for the example with the sister, if you can assist with that mediation between the individual and their sister or whoever it may be, really mediate and see if you can negotiate them staying in that place longer. Problem solving amongst the different situations that they may have. Maybe they have a unit available, but they just don't have enough money for security deposit and first month's rent. You want to summarize the conversation and ensure you're on the same page. And then you want to really make those connections and reach out to the supports and work to resolve the specific issues and or explore housing options. Lastly, step 6, you really want to summarize and follow up. So you want to start doing action steps, record who's going to do what, who's responsible for what, review and provide a copy to the person, and then set a time to follow up if necessary. And I'm going to quickly go through this so we can get to the practice stuff. So we said shelter diversion is a conversation, but what does that conversation look like? That conversation looks like the individual that's in a housing crisis feeling comfortable enough to share their story and letting you all know what's going on with them. And you as a provider really listening to them, helping them to identify their natural supports and resources. You're going to identify and highlight their strengths, be solution focused, provide information, guidance, resources, myth bust and reality test the different things that they say. As I said, they may only see the housing prices and not see any options. So test those and see, are there other options? Help them think about possible options. And then lastly, you're going to set realistic expectations. As they are sharing their story and as you're providing them with strengths and housing opportunities and so forth, then they'll start developing their own housing plan, right? They'll ask you some questions for clarity to get a better sense. And then they should start taking steps to secure and maintain permanent housing. So it is a conversation where there is an equal exchange on both sides. It is a collaborative conversation to assist them through their housing crisis. So different things that you may ask someone when you're having this diversion conversation, when you're helping them problem solve, you may want to ask, and again, it's not going question to question, but it's having a fluid conversation. But some sample questions is, can you describe your housing crisis? Getting a sense of what's going on with them. What's your housing crisis? Do you have a place to stay? Where did you sleep last night? And do you have a place to stay tonight? You're trying to get an idea of the sense of urgency. Have you ever previously called 211? Getting a sense of their history. How long have you been staying there if they are staying with someone? Where is the last stable place that you stayed before? And how long did you stay there? You want to know, are they constantly going to other people's houses? Are they bed hopping, couch surfing, right? How long were you able to stay there? And then you want to get a sense of their reasons. Why can't you stay there any longer? Maybe it's something that can be resolved through mediation, but why can't you stay there? Do you think that you or your family Can you possibly stay there longer temporarily if we provide you with some help or referrals to find permanent housing or connect you with other services? So is there any possibility that we can mediate? Can we help resolve? Can we connect you to services so that you have some other options? What resources do you have right now that can help you and your family find a place to stay temporarily or find permanent housing? Do you have any sources of income, any at all? Not just are you working, but do you have access to a phone? Because we want to know if you can follow up with them. Do you have an email address if you need to send them resources? So it's a conversation back and forth. You're trying to obtain as much information as possible and really helping them try to resolve their crisis. So some possible housing solutions may be to temporarily stay with a family member or natural support. You may mediate and negotiate for them to stay at their previous residence or their current residence. Sober home may be an option. You may provide financial assistance. CCH provides financial assistance for families, for individuals. So maybe there's some financial assistance that they qualify for security deposit, first month's rent, so forth. Maybe they are temporarily diverted as they seek new housing, or they're able to relocate permanently out of town, or shared housing is an option. But the point is there's a variety of ways that we can assist someone through their housing solution and not just take at face value what someone says is their crisis. Sometimes people always say, this is my crisis, I have no other options, and I want to be on the shelter list. Hold on, get some more information, test that and see, are there any other options? Any questions, any comments about any of that I just said?
Yes, Amber, I have a comment. I think that sometimes what happens is people that want to be in shelter because they have, quotes, heard that you get housing from shelter, you get rapid rehousing, you get stipends, you get vouchers, you get this, that, or the other thing. So I think that that's what I found. And, you know, I always say, no, that's not so. I mean, this is what we could do for you if you, you know, X, Y, you know, I go through the whole thing with them, but still, basically, I think that there's a false or a fallacy there about what happens if you do go into shelter. And even some of the DCF workers seem to have said, oh, well, no, if they go into shelter, you know, they can, you know, and I said, no, there's, you know, other tracks. So I think that might be one of the issues.
I completely agree. Yes, we see a lot of that, a lot of misinformed individuals or a lot of false information that's out there. And that's when we have to do the reality testing. That's when we have to set realistic expectations and ask those questions and dig deeper, like you said, because it's not just someone says they want to enter shelter. Okay, fine. I'm going to put you on the list. We got to dig a little deeper and ask additional questions and challenge them in a way.
Well, I like to tell them that this is a housing assistance program and not a shelter program. That's how I talk about that. And then, you know, just go from there.
I think that, yes, that's great. And that's also something that has come up in our CT Can and homelessness meetings as far as how to have those conversations, how to message to people how our system operates. Okay, anyone else? All right, so now we're going to start going into scenarios. This is when I talk less and you all talk more. So we're going to go into some scenarios. For this first scenario, we'll do as a group, and this is not a shelter diversion conversation, but this is training. This is leading up to the case note template. But for this first scenario, we want to identify the strengths that the person has. We want to make a list of some clarifying questions that you would ask them, identify resources that you would provide them and referrals that you would make. Talk about the different types of interventions that you would do, and then provide some potential outcomes or plans for this person based on the information they've shared. And keep in mind that if this was an actual practice, we have to take into account client choice. Now, we know that it doesn't happen this way, right? When you have your initial calls, you're not provided with all the information. You're oftentimes going in blindly, and you have to gather the information. But for the sake of this scenario and practicing, let's just act like this is a perfect world and they presented all this information to us. So for our first one, Stacy, I'll quickly go over this and then we'll start going down the list. So Stacy is in her mid-30s and has one daughter aged 8. She and her daughter have lived with their mom for 3 years. Stacy's on a lease and she pays rent. Mom has kicked her out because Stacy has relapsed. Stacy began using with her ex. The ex is remarried, not very involved with Stacy. Stacy's daughter is still living with her grandmother, and Stacy isn't allowed to see her. Stacy thinks that grandma may have called DCF on her. Stacy's work hours were cut to COVID because she repeatedly missed work during her relapse, and she was already on probation. However, she feels she was good at her job and is willing to talk to her boss. She's angry with her mom. She's mad at herself. She's frustrated. She wants help, but doesn't want to start recovery all over. She hasn't had anywhere to go since her mom picked her out and reports sleeping in the hallway of her mother's building. She says she has no other option besides going to the shelter and wants to be added to the shelter wait list. What would you all do with Stacy? And I think our first task was to, identify her strengths. What are some strengths that Stacy has?
She's working.
I'm reading. She's still able to pay her rent.
She still has her mom who helps her with her daughter.
Yeah, mom's mad at her.
Yeah, but she still helps. Right. She's still a support because she does care for her daughter.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Stacy has, she had a job and she's willing to talk to her boss again to see if she can possibly come back to work. What's another strength that Stacy?
She does pay rent. It says, right, that she pays her rent.
Yep.
She's on a lease and pays her rent.
Yep.
She was clean for 9 months. I think that's probably the crux to the situation. Her mother's mad at her for that. So she needs to go back into treatment or whatever she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously she still needs that support from the group. And I don't know if she's on meds or any of that. But I think that's the crux of it right there for the mom. She's disappointed in her daughter.
Yes.
And she still has her job. So that's a positive.
Right. Those are some strengths that Stacy has. And I should have wrote this down. Clarifying questions. What do we need to know more about? Or ask some deeper questions.
I think I would like to know when this happened before, because it sounds like it's happened before. What worked? Especially with regards to her situation with her mom. What worked before?
That's a good question. Yes. How was she able to be clean for so long before? I think a clarifying question for me would also be, why does she think DCF was called on her? We may want to know if she's currently using, but only how that may be affecting her. And if she may possibly want to go to a program.
And what other worries are on her mind? You know, like, for example, I know that her hours were cut. What else worries her in regards to her job? Because if she's worried that I'm going to lose my job if I go into a rehab, how can we chat with your boss about that? You know, like.
Yes, that will be a good one. I would also ask, do you think there's a chance? Like, is this the norm with you and your mom? Do you think your mom will let you come back into the unit? Also, I would want to know that, but then I would also educate her and let her know that you're on the lease and you pay rent. And mom's upset with you, but she can't just kick you out. You're on the lease. You've established residency there. So empowering her so that she knows that she has other options. Okay. And resources. What resources will you refer Stacey to?
Well, if she's open to the substance abuse program idea, maybe give her some resources and options in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other resources? Okay, anything that you all would do on your end to support or to help really resolve her housing crisis? I would say help her with mediating with mom. Help her with having that conversation with mom, letting mom know Stacey's also on the lease and can she stay here if she's willing to go to a program? What do you need for Stacey so that she can stay here longer? If she goes to a program, will that work? If she gets her job back, will that work? Just helping Stacey mediate that program. I'm sorry.
And also, if this DCF is involved, how can we include them on the plan? You know, how can they help?
Right. Yes. So what are some possible options for Stacey to resolve her housing crisis? What's a good outcome for her to divert her? Mediate. Stacey sees the crisis in front of her. Stacey is not seeing that Stacey's on the lease and she's been paying rent. So legally, mom can't kick her out. Stacey is not able to see that she still has a job, right? She needs to talk to her employer to find out her status. She's afraid. She doesn't know about DCF. She needs to make that phone call, maybe assisting her with looking into that. And letting her know, if Marlon said, it's not just coming in and being added and coming into the shelter, but really pushing back and saying, these are some options and let's explore these options. So I would say for Stacey, definitely mediating and letting her know that there are some options and talking to mom. Mom's mad. Mom has been going through this cycle with Stacey for a while, but I see mom as still being a support. So definitely mediating. Okay, I had another scenario, but honestly, we are further along than I thought. So I don't think we're going to have time for this one because I want to get to the case note template. In our separate full shelter diversion conversation, I'll be sure to include this scenario. This involves you all having some breakout rooms, but we don't have time for that. Sorry. We'll do that in our full shelter diversion conversation. But as we go into the CAN case note template, question for you all: what do you think is most important, the quality of service or the quality of your documentation?
Well, what do you want us to say? I would also, say this is a double-ended question here. The quality of service is most important to me.
Okay. What do I want you to say? I mean, it's not what I want you all to say.
I know not you, but just generally speaking, because we know what this is about, right? Documentation. So
I think they're both hold the same importance.
I think they both absolutely hold the same importance. We can provide great service, which we should, quality service, but if we're not documenting it also, we don't know the great service that you all provided. Right? We don't know what took place during that interaction. We're not able to follow up and see what happened. So I would say that both are equally important. And I may say, I'm not going to say documentation is more important, but there is something that I learned or heard along the lines where if it's not documented, then it didn't happen. I'm sure you all heard that before. So documentation is extremely, extremely important. And as we were going over having those problem-solving conversations and really working with someone and getting a good sense of what their housing situation and their housing crisis is, it's also about documenting it, right? So we can know what's going on with this person. So the next person outside of you can look at the file and say, oh, okay, this is what's going on. They may be a good fit for this program, or this is their current status. So we created the CAN case note template to support your CAN appointments, right? As you're having these conversations, as you're gathering information, the CAN case note template goes right along with that conversation. So the purpose is so that the case note template can be used as a guide to have the conversation. Going into a problem-solving conversation, going into your CAN appointments, it's important to know what kind of information you're trying to obtain. I'm sure you all may have your own templates or things that you use internally, but we created this so that it answers some of those questions that I had as far as those questions that you're going to ask during CAN appointments, usually your problem-solving conversation. So this goes along the same lines as that. The CAN case note template is now available in HMIS under case note templates. So on the left side, you'll go to case management, you'll go to case notes, and then you can go to add new and go to template and select CAN case note template. It's in HMIS and it really it's worded for you all as a provider to prompt you and to help you answer some of the questions, some of the information that you gathered during your conversation, right? So it shouldn't be used as a list where you'll go down asking questions to question, but really as a guide to help guide that conversation. It was created as a case note template. You all already do a CAN assessment, but it was created as a case note template because you have to follow up and do a case note anyways, but to just have it as a centralized place to make it more accessible to get the important details. And so that you don't have to go from assessment to assessment or look at this note or that note to try to have a better sense of an individual. So one place that really goes into detail, and it captures some of the information that is not included on the CAN assessment. So some suggestions for using the case note template is, it's in HMIS, but I will encourage you all to also copy and paste a template into a Word document. So if you're doing a CAN appointment in person, print it out and use it as a way for you to take your notes on, so that it's all in one place. If you're conducting a virtual CAN appointment, I would say have it on your screen while you're having your conversation, to make sure that you're gathering and obtaining all of that information that will be helpful. If you can complete your case note in HMIS shortly after your appointment, that will be great while everything is still fresh. And then just be as detailed and thorough as possible. Also, give yourself credit. You all are having these conversations, you're engaging, you're getting this information. Put it in a note so we can capture it, to show the great conversation that you all had. So the case note template has 8 different components to it, and it is covering various areas, things that we often don't receive or they're not captured in the CAN assessment. So we want to know about the housing composition. So who will be living in the house? Not what is your family makeup, you know, how many children you have, but we want to know who will be living in the house. That will give us a better sense of what resources we can possibly connect someone to. We want to know if this household is an individual, a young adult, family, and then also the ages, right? The ages of the children. That will be helpful for connection purposes also. We want to get a good sense of their housing status and their history. So some of the same questions that I had on the other one. We want to know, where did they live last night? Where did they stay over the past year? Did they ever have their own lease? So obtaining some of this information. You're not going to ask these questions, but this is the type of information that you all should be obtaining when you're capturing their housing status and history. What do you all think is a good starter question to start capturing this information? I would say ask them, can you tell me what's going on? Can you tell me about your current housing crisis? That may open it up so that they can start spilling and providing you the details of these other stuff as well. But that can be a good starter question. I saw you unmuted, Marlon. You have something to add?
No, my cat just did that. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, natural supports. So for natural supports, we're asking that you list the family, friends, co-workers who are natural supports. For this one, we're not asking if you have any natural supports, which is what some of the assessments asked prior. But we're going into more detail because sometimes people are not able to realize that they have natural supports, right? So we're going to ask them, how do you meet your basic needs? Speaking of animals, sorry, that was my dog. If you are unsheltered, how are you taking care of your basic needs? Do you have someone where you go and, they let you shower there? Do you have someone that you occasionally cook? They make meals for you. Those people are natural support. So you're helping them identify their natural supports by asking these questions. Maybe someone lets them use their phone. That's a natural support. So we're digging deeper so that we can figure out who their natural supports are without necessarily asking them. Because you ask, who are your natural supports? They may say, I don't have anyone. But you do, because there's someone that is letting you come in and shower or giving you money here and there. That's a support. Sources of income / employment. So for this in the template, we want to find out how are they able to pay for their financial obligations and take care of their basic needs. We are not asking if they're employed. What's the difference between asking someone if they're employed versus how are you able to take care of your financial obligations or your basic needs?
Well, they could be getting SSI, SSDI, child support, any of the other pensions. I mean, there's a bunch of things they could be getting for income.
Right.
In addition to employment, or it could be under the table. I mean, there's all kinds of.
Right.
Your family might be providing some help with that.
Right, because if we just ask the question, are you employed? We're not going to learn this additional information. They're not employed technically. They're working under the table. They're not going to tell you they're employed, but they're not employed, but they're still receiving money from their family. So just rephrasing how we're asking questions so that we can get the information that we really need to find out. We have included a section on domestic violence. So we want to know if there is any active domestic violence right now. I think that's a CAN assessment question. And sometimes someone will say, no, there's no active domestic violence. However, we're also trying to get additional information. They may not say there's active domestic violence, but we also want to know, is there any active restraining orders or protective order? And that's important to know as well when we're talking about safety or what someone has going on. So asking about that. So even if they say no to the first one, in conversation, say, okay, great. So do you have is there any restraining orders or protective orders? No. Okay, great. And then there's no need to go into the other questions. We have community supports and services. So we want to know what community supports or services are already in place. When you're doing your CAN appointment, we want to know, is there anyone else that they're working with? Do they have any other providers? Are there any other people working with them on their housing crisis, right? So that you also can know if you need to connect with these people. So what's another way of asking what community supports or services do you have in place? Is there anyone that helps you? Is there any office that you go to? Do you receive any services from anyone? That can be something that you ask. And then when you're writing your note, it will be helpful if you just put a note that they have a clinician at wherever they are at Willard Clinic. They may also have a case manager. Sometimes people don't know that it's a case manager, but they know it's someone that helps them out and they come to their apartment each month. So putting those details into your CAN note will be helpful as well. Yeah, someone put in the chat, are you working with any other agency? That is very important and helpful to know. And then it's also important to know and capture in this case note template, are there any community supports or services that they would like to be connected to? And if so, provide the contact information. You all are doing these things, but it's split up between so many different case notes. So putting all of that stuff in one place. For the template for this, you may add that, yes, they don't have any groceries in the home. They want to be connected to a food bank, but it requires a referral. So I submitted that referral. The next section for the case note template is we're trying to capture the housing barriers so we can know if we're not able to divert someone and they are connected to a program, what type of housing barriers may we encounter, right? So summarize what factors led to homelessness and what are the most significant barriers. So you want to get, as you're asking them about their housing prices, what led to their current situation. You may put that they were laid off from their job and they were not able to stay current with their rent. He's looking for another job, but doesn't have any other sources of income. A potential barrier is that he doesn't have great credit and he currently has a high electric bill. So just what barriers are there? We've also added to this section, because it's not captured anywhere else, but if someone is possibly on the sex offender list, that can be helpful to know as you're looking for housing for this person, right? Are there any limits? Are there any barriers? What landlords, what area should I be looking at? So gathering all that important information and having it in one place. And then after you capture all of the information in one place, then you're going to start planning and next steps. So often we see as case notes that there was a appointment, but then there's no next steps. So what happened? What happened after the appointment? What is the client going to do? What are you going to do in your role? What resources or referrals were provided? What was the outcome of the situation? Were they diverted? Were they referred to outreach? Were they added to the wait list? We know that you all in HMIS do your assessment and you put things in different places. But again, this is an easy way to get the full picture by looking at one note versus having to go in various places. So because I actually skipped over the scenario, I'm a little ahead of time, but we introduced this case note template maybe a month or so ago as far as a Word document, and then it was added into HMIS. We asked the Shelter Diversion Learning Collab to encourage their staff to start using it just to get initial feedback to see if we needed to implement any changes. And some staff actually started using it. So just opening it up for discussion at this point, has anyone started to use the CAN case note template already?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and what has your experience been using it? Do you find it to be helpful? Does it seem like it's more work or just any additional input from your experience using it that you want to provide the group?
Hi, I'm Danellis. I work at the Hub in Hartford. I think it's useful. I think it kind of leads the conversation. I do think that there are some areas where the question might be a bit repetitive, where you can kind of answer two questions in one, right. But you have to kind of repeat the same, thing that you're typing later down, like in a similar question, if that makes sense. But overall, I feel like it leads the conversation. It takes about 15, maybe not that much, depending on the case and the complexity of the person and how much information they're willing to give you.
Right. Thank you for that feedback. And that's a great point as far as being redundant, which is also why this is used to guide the conversation and just cover the different areas as far as information that you need to gather. If someone answered a question initially and you feel like you have enough information, no need to ask that question again, right? You can just plug it in to cover that section that you have that information. But use it as a guide, not necessarily questions that you have to ask the person, if that makes sense. Anyone else?
So for me, on like the documentation side of it, I think it's captured a lot. There's a lot of areas that we don't tend, not everyone we need to capture on it. So a lot of places just kind of stay blank. So I don't know if having it more so drop down boxes for those areas that apply for folks, because I noticed that people don't like, fortunately, people don't like to read. So it captures too much. You have to look through too much to find the answers that you're specifically looking for. So for me, on a documentation side of things, if we had Dropbox where we specifically just had to input answers that apply to the person, would be better than just having like areas of just uncaptured, like just blank.
I think having it blank is fine. If it doesn't pertain to the person, it doesn't pertain to the person. The sections is more so about the things that would apply, the things that if that person, if it fit for that person, you should capture it, right? Those are the things that should be covered in that section. It's not a, do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have this? It's not that, but it's more so, here's some prompting questions for you to think about, that it kind of information that will be good to put here so that we can know.
Right. No, which I'm saying, but I think what I'm trying to say is more on the side. So let's say I have to pull up the case note to read it. If I'm looking for specific answers or specific things, I have to go through the whole case note to find the answer. You know what I'm saying? Because we have to go through everything, like opposed to if there was just something that was just specifically, okay, DV or where the person stayed last night, I could just look up that information. So for me, I think it's just a lot of information that some of these folks, like, it's no information or we aren't capturing because, you know, we're just unable to get the information. So it's just blank areas where we now have to just make our process of looking through things a lot longer to find answers, opposing just to be able to go there and look at the note. So
okay. Great feedback. I will say, just working with HMIS, when you include drop downs and all of that, it makes the process a lot longer to put stuff in HMIS. So this was our happy medium, just so that we can get it put in there as far as a guide. Anyone else? Okay. For those of you that have not used it yet, I encourage you to use it for your CAN appointments so that you can have as a reference. It is just it's a tool that can assist you. Yes, Faith, you have a question?
Okay, so you may have answered it already. You may have not. So how do you want us to put it into HMIS? Do you want us to copy and paste it and have our answers right next to it? That's because that's how I've been doing it. Or do you mind if we just put it into a paragraph and don't do it the way like you gave it to us? I don't know if that made sense.
I see what you're saying. It should, because think of someone else outside of you coming in to see what's going on with the person. I would say put the information under each section.
Okay.
Yeah, if I quickly, which I do often go into HMIS, if I'm looking to see what barriers this person has, I'm going to go right there. And it's some barriers, if there are any, should be spelled out right there. If I want to see the family composition, how many children do they have? How old are they? I want to be able to go right to that top part. Someone asked if I can share the Word document. Yes, we can share the Word document so that you can have. I do know people that have done in-person CAN appointments have printed it out, especially those at the hub have printed out and has used it to capture their notes while they're doing it and just plugging things as they're having the conversation in different spots. So then they'll go back and put that in HMIS. That has been helpful. If you want to quickly take some notes while you're doing your CAN appointment and put it in different spots, that has been helpful, but yes. Any other questions? Okay, so the slides will be available as well as the recording. The template is already in HMIS. It is available for all organizations. So if you have access to HMIS, you should be able to bring up the case note template to use. As I said, this was not a shelter diversion training. This was really more so about how you can use the template to support your conversation, and letting you all know that the template is now into HMIS and it is live, and to use it. It can help to assist with pulling out that information and having it in one centralized space. But we know that with having those problem solving conversations, it requires additional skills, as we talked about before. And that is just the first point as far as the CAN assessment. We also will get to the point where we have to develop housing stabilization plans for those that we are not able to divert. So we will be having a training next week, next Thursday, same time, on creating a person-centered housing stabilization plan. We're going to go into detail about how to really put that together, go over making SMART goals, how to truly make it person-centered and cater to that person, how to implement it, how to action plan with that housing stabilization plan. Following up on just a documentation training series, we'll be having a training on telling the story through quality case notes, really making some good quality case notes so that we can have a good idea and understanding of what's going on with someone. Finalizing that date, but I would probably say realistically, honestly, it will probably be after the ATI. ATI is going to be on May 17th. It is our 20th annual training institute. So being that it's 20 years, we are focusing on just our journey. A lot of best practices that may have gotten lost along the years as far as housing first, shelter diversion, trauma-informed care, where we are currently as a state, and different innovative practices that we plan on bringing into this work in our sector. Also, you all know that motivational interviewing is a huge part of having a successful problem-solving conversation and just being a service provider. So we will be having a in-person 2-day workshop, June 13th and 14th. I am finalizing the location, but those are the dates. We also know that there is a need to have more intensive case management, more intensive in-person case management. So many of our trainings will be in person more than just virtual. But we are almost at 3:30. Before we get off, does anyone have any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time and joining me. If you have any questions, if anything comes up, please feel free to email me at afreeman@cch.org.
Thank you very much, Amber.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.